Hey guys, today we're going to be going over Chapter 3, Section 4, Density for chemistry. So you've already done a lab that talks about how to find density, so some of that's going to be familiar. So today we're just going to go over the properties of density so you really understand what it means. All right, so density describes the mass per unit volume, which means per a small little bit of volume, how much mass is there in every single section. So remember that when you do this, you take the mass and divide it by volume. So you're thinking, how close are these molecules? Every single molecule or bit of matter inside of a substance has a certain amount of mass. So if you're talking about mass and you divide it by how much space, you're just saying, I'm going to take all of that and say in one section how much mass is there, in one section, in one section. So here's the formula. Density equals mass over volume. If you ever forget which one goes on top or bottom, remember that I love density because mass over volume kind of looks like a heart. Yay! All right, we've got a sample here that has a low volume versus, a low density versus a high density. High density means there's a lot of mass packed into a small area. Now, when I do mass divided by volume, it's really talking about how much mass in each little section. And then no matter how much I have, it's still talking about that little section. So if I took this sample and I had a whole bunch of it, my molecules are still just as close together as they are in my small sample because I would literally be just replicating all this all over the screen. All right, so this is low density versus this is high density. So notice in the low density, you've got a lot of space between molecules. So that means you're going to have low mass in a certain area versus in high density, you have a lot of stuff. So that'll be a lot of mass in the same area. You can also think about what happens if you change the volume. So like if I only had a little piece of this little, even though this is high density, then the mass will go down, but the density stays the same. So again, density of a substance, let me change the screen here. The density of a substance is constant. It doesn't matter how much of it there is, the density is always the same. So you did a stacking lab where you put different liquids and they stayed in place based on their density. You can also take solids that have the same density and they'll actually stay in their area as well. So for example here, we have a popsicle stick. That's wood. Wood typically floats on water for most woods because it's so has a little density, it has such a low density. No matter how much wood you have, it's going to stay on top of that water because it's literally just talking about the space between molecules in one little itty bitty bit because you divide by the total volume. So no matter how big that piece of wood is, the density is going to be the same, so it always stays there. Versus like a piece of metal might sink no matter what because the density is high. All right. So now let's do some practice problems. So a block of aluminum displaces water by 15.0 milliliters and has a mass of 40.5 grams. So what's the density? Well, you're going to take your formula and plug stuff in. List what you know. I know my volume is 15.0 milliliters. I know my mass is 40.5 grams. So my density is always mass divided by volume. Remember your heart. My mass is 40.5 grams. So I put that on the top. And my volume is right here, 15.0 milliliters. Notice the units here will be grams per milliliter. So you plug this into your calculator, 40.5 divided by 15.0, and then leave your units. So it's 2.70 grams per milliliter. I have 3 sig figs or digits in my top number, 3 in my bottom number, so I like to keep 3 in my final answer. How about what is the mass of ethyl alcohol that exactly fills a 200.0 milliliter container? We know that the density of ethyl alcohol is 0.789 grams per milliliter. All right, so I've got a volume here, 200.0 milliliters, and I have a density, 0.789 grams per milliliter. So I'm going to plug stuff in that I know into my formula and leave an X for what I don't know. So density, do I know density? I do. Oh, list the things you know first. So I know my density is 0.789 grams per milliliter equals mass. I don't know my mass, so that's my X on top. My volume, I do know, 200.0 milliliters. So here is my equation, which looks a little complicated until you remember that this is technically a fraction. I can say that this is over 1. And what that means is for ethyl alcohol, for every 1 milliliter of space, so remember in your graduated cylinder, if you filled it just up to that 1 milliliter section, that mass will always be 0.789 grams. If I had 2 milliliters, I would double the mass. If I had 3 milliliters, I would triple this mass. So it's just talking about for each milliliter, this is how much mass I have. Now I want to know about 200 milliliters, how much mass. I can do that one in my head. I just know it's going to be 200 times this, but let's show how you solve more complicated problems. So once you have two fractions, have you ever done this? Two fractions set equal to each other, you can cross multiply. There has to be those two situations to cross multiply. So you have to have two fractions that are set equal, then you can cross multiply. So straight across here, I've got 0.789 times 200. And that's equal to my x, because 1 times x is right there. And you solve that in your calculator to be 157.8 grams. That would be the mass of a 200 milliliter solution of ethyl alcohol. Okay, good luck with your density problems. Make sure you ask any questions if you have them.